Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to today's meeting. It's really designed for people who already have an LPS conservatorship established for their family member or loved one. And today's, whole session is about your rights and resources and law and so forth. Want to make a disclaimer that Gail and I are teaching this class based on what we have learned from others. And although LPS attorneys have listened to our presentations in the past and didn't find any fault in it, what we have to present is from, again, hearsay from others. So we feel that the accuracy is there, but we just can't offer legal advice. All right, so let's move forward. Araceli, if we can bring up the slides, we will jump right in here and get going. Perfect. Okay. Oops, I gotta click on the, got it, to clear my screen. There we go. So anyway, today, we really appreciate NAMI Urban Los Angeles for hosting this meeting. They do this from time to time and about every 3 months or so with Gail and I. And we just really appreciate Mr. Turner, who is the president of NAMI Urban Los Angeles, for bringing this onto the screen. And also A. Sorelli, who is the webmaster, who is working behind the scenes and will be running the show for us today. So it makes our job easy. And also Maddie Cobbs for all of her support in all of these endeavors as well. So I'm Jim Farell. I run a conservator assistance group here in Orange County. Gail Evangueletti. Somebody asked me the other day, how do you pronounce her last name? I think I'm going to really mess it up. And I said, don't worry about it. I've been messing it up for 10 years. I don't think I have it straight yet. So it's really a challenge. Great lady, great name. Listen, we're very dedicated to you guys. And Gail has made all this possible. She scripted all of this, put it together. She's just amazing. So later you'll see our contact information. If you have any questions you need to ask us later or contact us, feel free to do that. Just remember that Gail is back east in Florida, and you don't want to call her in the evening because she's probably going to be woken up if you do that. So keep that in mind, if you will.
Thank you, Jim.
Let's go for the next slide. And there's our disclaimer. So shame on me for not realizing that was on. So we present the laws that should help guide your decisions. Most information presented pertains to Los Angeles. This is a NAMI Urban Los Angeles presentation. The resources will be for Los Angeles. But for those of you that are in today's class, even if you're not in Los Angeles, know that the Welfare Institution Code and what you're going to be presented with today really applies statewide. Throughout all the individual counties. And of course, every county does things just a little bit differently from other counties. How they interpret the laws may be a little bit different than how other counties are interpreting the laws. But really, the information that you're getting today should be of immense help to you. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. So whenever your loved one's in the hospital or you're dealing with other people that are involved in his care, refer to yourself as the conservator, not, well, I'm my son's dad or I'm my son's, mom. It kind of sets the stage that you're the conservator, you're in control, and you have the authority to make decisions in his care. Really important, if you haven't taken the free NAMI to NAMI, family to family class, I really encourage you to do that. NAMI Urban Los Angeles does a great job of that. They're very informative. They're going to be sharing resources. They'll be discussing mental health issues on various spectrums. It's a great class, a great support class. I really recommend that to everybody. We want, these again are tips. You should keep a journal. We definitely want to keep track of medications, but we also want to keep track of the people that we talk to. So let's say you're talking to your son's doctor, you're discussing medications, you want to keep notes on that. If you're talking to, let's say, the hospital and your son or daughter is in there and you're, talking to somebody, maybe it's the social worker, write down the time of day, write down her name, because otherwise you'll say, well, gee, I was talking to somebody in a hospital and they said this. Well, who did you talk to? Well, I don't remember. Now, you should always know who you're talking to, who you have talking to. So keep two journals. It's very, very important. And lastly, get involved. Get involved in, in working with NAMI, attending their meetings. Get involved legislatively. Go to your mental health board meetings in your community. You can just Google that and find out more about where they are, when they are, and so forth. And the more you learn, the more the more information that you accrue over time, the more valuable you are to your conservatee. Next slide, please. So LPS, Gail?
Yeah. The LPS conservatorship, it's the legal term that they use in California for involuntary mental health treatment. Other states have other terminology. Some call it conservatorships, some call it a guardianship. You do not want a guardianship in California. A guardianship means you are liable for debts, anything the person does or doesn't do. And LPS conservatorship, you are not liable. The LPS conservatorship was named after the legislators Latterman, Petrus, and Short, and this was back in 1974. So these guide laws, whatever, they're kind of old. It's in the Institutions Code 5200 plus. Great thing to read when you have insomnia. The laws actually do not reflect the current scientific research that we have for recovery. Medications back then were not very good, and I think there was basically just one that worked a little bit. But today we have a lot more medications that work much better. And we're going to talk about medications in a bit. Next slide. Thank you. The forms for conservators, there's a booklet called Help When You if you are the conservator, but even if you're not, download this. It will help you a lot. It's Helping Your Loved One, a family guide to conservatorship and involuntary treatment. You find it on the internet, and the PowerPoint will be on NAMI Urban LA website. So you can pull that up and say, okay, what was it? But it's very good. It gives you a lot of tips, a lot of what we're saying, but there might be something else in there that helps you. Next slide. The essence of the conservatorship is to mandate medication. That's what the whole thing is about. And it's the only treatment program where they can mandate medication. All the others, AOT, full service partner, this care court that they're doing, they cannot mandate medication. They can encourage, and they do a darn good job on that, but they can't make the person do medication. So that is the essence of the conservatorship. Next slide. The court for LPS conservatorship is being heard in the Superior Court Department A, which is in Norwalk. That's the address for it. If you have a conservatorship and you have to renew it, pay attention. It's not in Hollywood anymore. It's in Norwalk. Judge Scott Herring, he spoke yesterday. He is really a good judge, one of the best we've had. He listens to what you have to say, and he makes a ruling after hearing everything on it. And he understands mental illness. He knows the cases before they even come up. So I have to hand it to him. I was very impressed with him, but I've heard wonderful things about him too. Next slide. Okay, the LPS conservatorship, there are two kinds. There's the conservatorship of the person, which is what the doctor will initiate when the person's in the hospital or jail. Or now we have a pilot project in Los Angeles. Not all counties have it. And at that point, it's the conservatorship of the person. There's a conservatorship of the estate, which means if they have school loans, if they have court cases, if they have debts that need to be addressed, then you want the conservatorship of the estate. You do not need it to be a representative payee for the person. You don't need a conservatorship for that. That's Social Security, disability income, or SSI, or veterans. A representative payee. All the doctor does is write a statement for you to be representative payee. You give it to Social Security or to the VA, open up a bank account in both names, and it's a done deal. It's one of the easiest things you can do. Not everything is, and Jim and I are going to tell you a lot of things. Sounds great, sounds easy, oh, no big deal. Oh, you fight for every inch of the way to get the treatment, which is unfortunate. It shouldn't be like that. But you cannot have the conservatorship of the estate unless you have it of the person. Now, you can have it of the person without the estate, which is what most of them are. But once the person is gone, so does the estate. Okay, next slide. The succession of conservatorship. If you're concerned when the person's having a conservatorship hearing and you go, I'd like to be the conservator, but I'm really not so sure about this. What you can do is let the public guardian, that's the one that works with you. They interview you. They just make sure that you're reasonable and you're of sound mind. They will petition the court so that you can be the conservator. So if you choose to be the conservator and a month, 2 months down the road, you go, this is not cutting it, I can't do this. You can petition the court, the mental health court, and within 7 to 10 days, you're going to have a hearing over there. And the succession can go back to the public guardian or vice versa. If the hospital's giving you a lot of pressure, it might be a good idea to let the public guardian be the conservator for a month or two, and then you can petition to take it over from that. Believe me, the public guardian in Los Angeles will do cartwheels if you want to take it, because each person probably has about 70 cases. That's a lot. And if you're the conservator, you know your loved one the best, but you have to be careful that they don't manipulate you and push you around. Okay. Also, if your loved one is at court and tells the judge, I don't want my parents conservator, or I don't want anybody conservator, let the public guardian be it, the judge has to honor what the person said, pretty much. But they could probably have a rehearing within a month or two to see if that person's changed their mind. And I would say probably a good percentage of the time they did, because they find out the conservator, public guardian, they do the best they can. But when you're dealing with 50 to 70 people, you don't give them all the attention that they may want. It's just a matter of logistics. Okay, next slide.
So the question oftentimes arises as who should be the conservator of your family member? And I've had families say, "What should I be the conservator, or should I let the public guardian's office be the conservator?" So let's run through it. Basically, if we were to, in the process of obtaining the conservatorship and it's going through the courts, the public guardian's office is going to contact you and they'll ask whether you want to be the conservator or for them to be the conservator. If you let them do it, the pros is that you'll be able to place the person in a state-approved facility. There's less stress for the family member because the public guardian's office will handle all the financial, and everything that they request and need will be handled by the public guardian's office. Okay, can you please shut off your microphone and stay muted because it's disrupting the meeting? Make sure you're muted down on the left. Thank you. And so consequently, the negative to all of this is that you have less involvement with the recovery process. You have no control for medication. You won't be able to discuss things with the doctor if the doctor if your conservative refuses to allow that to happen, because we have the privacy laws. So what we should do then, if you turn it over to the public guardian's office, you work to establish a working relationship with the public guardian and kind of work with them in that capacity, so they can kind of best understand the needs of your family member. Okay, next slide. So then the question would arise, well, what if I'm the conservator? What does that look like? Well, you'll have direct contact with the doctor. You'll be able to discuss the medications that are needed. You'll be able to reject any inappropriate treatment facilities, which is one of your responsibilities, to go out and make sure that they're appropriate for their needs. You'll be able to reject medications and treatment places. We'll talk about rejecting medications. It's actually one of my slides later on. I think it's slide 35 or somewhere in there. And you have to be very careful about not allowing the doctor to prescribe the medication. The whole goal with a doctor as a conservator is to work with them and not try to control them. Because if you're not going along with them, you can lose your conservatorship. And we'll talk more on that later. The conservatee then, if you're the conservator, are going to be, oftentimes hounding you to buy them things that you know they shouldn't have. They want you to give them money to spend. There's just a whole list of things that they'll be pressuring you to do. Also, if they're back in the hospital for any reason, they'll be trying to push you around and discharge your loved one to a facility that's not really appropriate for their level of treatment needed for recovery, which is your right to make that determination. So you just have more pressure as a conservator overall. But then, and there too, the flip side is that you'll know what's going on with your loved one, what medications they're on. You can, and you know them better than anybody else does. You can best fill their needs. Next slide. So another question again, in fact, it came up yesterday. Well, wait a minute, if I'm a conservator and my family member does something that causes some damage, or they are maybe tearing up a board and care, or they incur some bills, am I going to be responsible for that? And the Welfare Institution Code 5358.1 says no, that you are not by law liable either civilly or criminally for anything the conservatee may or may not do. There's an exception to that, and we'll talk about that later. I believe Gail has a slide when she talks about not letting your conservatee drive the car if they're taking the keys with your permission. There could be consequences, and she'll cover that. But you are not financially responsible for the conservatee's debts. Next slide. So you have, regarding the rights and responsibility of the LPS conservator, you have the power to approve or disapprove all medications, treatment, and placement. If you know of a facility, or you've gone out to a facility before a hospital can discharge and move to another facility, as conservator, you have the legal right to stop that transfer and say, I need to go to that other facility and see if it's appropriate for my conservatee's treatment. If you are, again, disapproving of medications, we'll talk about that a little bit further as well. You have to be very careful because you could lose your conservatorship if you're not working with the doctor on that. So we'll go into that in greater detail later. Next slide. So as a conservator, you have the right also to speak directly with the treating doctor, and that is so important. You want to establish a positive relationship with the doctor and work with them. They know what your rights are and so forth. But there again, you don't want to alienate your doctor, your son or daughter's doctor. You want to work with them, bring them up to speed as to why you feel certain things are needed medically or otherwise. And also you have the right to apply for the SSI, SSDI, Medi-Cal, Medicare, and VA benefits. You can have private insurance, Medi-Cal, and Medicare all at the same time. So primarily, let's move to the next slide. I forgot what I was going to say. Yeah.
The California Welfare and Institutions Code 5358.5 is very powerful. And this is something, if you are the conservator, you have the right to hospitalize your loved one when you deem it's necessary, not when they meet the criteria of harm to self and harm to others or gravely disabled. They already are gravely disabled. The courts declared they're gravely disabled. And nobody can say differently because they would be in contempt of court. So that is one thing, because that's a requirement to be under the conservatorship. Do not wait for your loved one to decompensate, to harm to self, harm to others, or go really downhill. If this law gives you the right, and you can call me on that or Jim, because both Orange County and LA are very aware of this. If your loved one decides to go off their medication for a week and you've tried to get them back on it, don't wait longer for them to get sicker and sicker. And don't call the police and say, he needs to go to the hospital, because they will tell you they don't meet the criteria because they're not attorneys. They don't know the law. And there's a lot of laws out there. What you do is you call Marianne Brown in Los Angeles. You can call me, and they know the law. They have a team. A team can go out and put the person in the hospital. They need a copy of your conservatorship. They need a statement in writing, just one paragraph that you deem is necessary for them to go to the hospital. If you do it quickly, when they go to the hospital is the only place that can mandate medication. If they're in an IMD and they go off their medication, the IMD can't force them. They can keep encouraging them, but they have to transfer them back to a hospital so that they can get back on their medication. So if let's say you've waited a week, 10 days, they're transported back to the hospital, they're given their medication, chances are they don't have to have R&R at the hospital. If you wait months, they might end up being in the hospital for 2, 3, 4 weeks or waiting for an IMD. But once they go and they get that medication, they get the message, I think I have to take my medication. Otherwise, the police are going to take me back there, or whoever comes for them. So don't wait. If you do wait and you call me, I'm not a happy camper at that point, because if you are the conservator, your responsibility is to keep that person in a forward motion for treatment, for recovery. All right, next slide.
Can I just cut in before we
Of
move
course.
forward? We have resistance to this first comment, as conservator having the right to hospitalize your loved one who you deem necessary. That's in the Welfare Institution Code. However, the CAT team and the directors of the past directors of the CAT team don't necessarily just automatically place him into the hospital if you request it. They still want to do an assessment, and if they don't feel that he meets criteria, they may not transport. And I've discussed this with one of our best LPS attorneys here in Orange County. And primarily, yes, I have that legal right to place my conservatee into the hospital if I deem it necessary. However, if they don't want to go, how do I get him to that hospital? So then I call the CAT team, and unless they are going to do an assessment first, they will not transport. And they always assure you, well, I'm sure we'll get him in there, but we can't just transport them. So their position here in Orange County is that you can't direct the CAT team to transport. And of course, we all know that the police department across the nation have really dug in, and they are not really wanting to get involved in that either. So it's really a challenge across the board, especially here in Orange County, because I've had them say, well, he doesn't meet criteria and not transport. And it's like, how do you, where's the enforcement? So unless you can afford to hire an attorney and go after the Department of Behavioral Health, how are you going to enforce that? And they feel that they don't have that criteria. So it isn't quite as smooth maybe in Orange County as it is in LA County. Generally, they do transport, but there have been times that they've refused. Just let it be.
And Jim's right. The CAT team is the term that they use for a combination of like the police and an evaluator. That's specific to Orange County, if I'm correct. LA has different terms. They call it SMART team, PET team, I don't know, Hope team or something. There's different terms that they use.
CAT is the crisis assessment team.
Right. And
Right.
ours is, I don't know what SMART stands for, but they're pretty good. If you're having trouble, please don't hesitate to give me a ring, because I have the contacts that can help you to get them in the hospital within a few days. Okay.
Right.
All right. Next slide. And Jim, thank you for that comment on Orange County. All right. The Welfare and Institutions Code. Basically, the conservatee by court degree is gravely disabled. That's why you should be able to do this. We had to go up to the medical director and actually the director of DMH, Department of Mental Health in Los Angeles. They ran it through all their attorneys and they agreed that this was the law and that this can be done. Because otherwise, why have the conservatorship if the person says, hey, I'm not going to take medication? And that's what it's all about. How do you make them do it? So they do it here. The conservator can request police transport to a hospital for treatment, but don't call the police and try and do that, because keep in mind, they don't know the law. So go through the channels of DMH and don't be calling every Tom, Dick, and Harry. You want to call the specific people who are aware of this law. And remember, I said the hospital is the only place where you can force the medication. As conservator, you are authorized to detain and treat, ADT. Public Guardian they've informed us of that particular law. So that's most helpful, that you have the authority to detain and treat. That's the ADT. All right, Jim, you want to add anything?
No, I think we've nailed it.
Okay, next. The authorization to detain and treat, that's the form for it. It's the Power 6 when you get your conservatorship, Power 6 and 7 and 8, 8A. If you look at your conservatorship papers, you have been given specific powers. And if you look at those powers, that is what they are. So be sure you know what your powers are. And we're going to talk about a few other powers that if you don't have them and you need them, you can always go back to the court and ask for them. All right, next slide. Jim?
Yes.
Cal-Able.
Give me a second. Cal-Able. Cal-Able is a division of an agency here in California that basically was created to expand the types of things that you can do for your loved ones in terms of spending money on them. If you, for an example, are paying for a more expensive board and care and have to take additional funds out of your own pocket for their housing, Social Security, if they were to find out, could then deduct a certain amount of monies from the income that your loved one is on. And it goes on like that. There's a lot of things that you can't utilize his SSI funds for. So Cal-Able was really kind of put together to best cover a lot of that without losing your SSI benefits. And it reads, this page lists the different disability related expenses that can be paid for without losing government funding. You would join that, and then you would decide how you want to provide your funds, basically, whether you want it to be in an interest-bearing account. So it can be like a savings account for your loved one, or you can not have it. Just you want it to be secure only without investing. And Sarelli, if you are brave enough to click on the Cal-Able link there, down below, next one down, yes, that will launch Zoom, launch the internet actually, and it should not disrupt anything. You'll shoot me later if it does. It's not opening. So I think the next slide then will cover that. So let's just move to the next slide. I'm sorry. These are some of the things that you can use the funds for. You can use it for their education, housing, transportation, employment, health prevention and wellness, assistive technology, personal support, miscellaneous expenses. Again, you can cover housing, you can buy them computers, all of these sort of things without losing any, or without incurring any penalties from Social Security. Next slide. Gail, that's yours.
The LPS conservatorship of the estate. This is, if you need this, this is most helpful. You can negotiate debts, and if they owe money to a lot of charge cards and you have a little bit of money, their money, not your money, you can contact the companies and you can negotiate maybe 10 cents on the dollar, 25 cents on the dollar, whatever you're comfortable with. And if they don't want to work with you on that, tell them, okay, fine. You can't get it because they're under a conservatorship and you have to fax over your conservatorship papers. And after 3 years, that debt is gone. So don't worry, don't get too anal about some of these things. You can handle criminal court cases, which is very helpful. You can acquire a waiver for school loans. A lot of times people owe money on school loans. There's no way they can pay them back because their mind is just not good. So you can get a waiver, and usually after 3 years, that loan is totally dismissed. You can cancel their credit card. That's a biggie. You can also, if you get the conservatorship of the estate, ask the attorney, ask the court to appoint you an attorney. The attorney is usually free unless the client has a lot of money. If they have a lot of money, then the court will use their money to help pay for the attorney. But most of our people don't. So they will give you an attorney that you can use it. And if you have questions during the year, actually, it's a good time, not even if you're getting the conservatorship of the estate. When you get that LPS conservatorship, ask the court to appoint you an attorney should you have questions during the year. And that way you have direct access to an attorney when needed. All right, next slide. The conservator must have court approval for all invasive treatment. Even a shot would be considered invasive because you've punctured the skin. If they're going to the dentist and they're going to give them Novocaine, you better get a court approval for that. And it doesn't take that long. You just contact the court, tell them that you need a hearing. And if you have an attorney assigned to you, he can go to court the next day pretty much and get that invasive medical form done. If it is an emergency, that is different. You can make that call. Appendicitis, if they have an appendicitis, they say we're not going to operate for 3 or 4 days, which they normally don't do that. Then you have to have court approval. But if they need to operate right away, of course, you can approve that. But then let the court know what took place. You have to inform the court of all medical problems, and that's I believe it's power 12 on your paperwork. When you get that conservatorship, if the person needs insulin, if they need heart medication, any problems they have, cancer treatments, ask the court to approve 12 for these specific items, for the items that you're requesting. And they pretty much all the time do it for any medical problems that may arise that they may need. Okay, next slide.
I just wanted to chip in that recently there was a parent that was conservator of her sister, and her sister needed some very serious surgeries and was unaware of this. And the public defender's office went after her as a conservator, trying to take the conservatorship away from her. So it's very easy to lose your conservatorship if you don't go to the courts and get pre-approval for these kind of medical conditions if they arise. I'm sorry, next slide. Go ahead, Gail.
That's okay. Thank you. Medical emergency, all non-emergency invasive procedures must be approved by Department in Los Angeles. But whatever county that conservatorship is granted, it's still the same. You have to do that. No experimental treatment is permitted. So you cannot go and say, okay, we're going to do this or we're going to do that. Like UCLA has all these grants for experimental drugs. You can't sign your loved one up for that. All medical issues ask to have it approved by Department A, and they pretty much do approve everything. Even like if you're doing that shock treatment, the VA sometimes does that because people have problems with PTSD and violence, that they will ask for the shock treatment. You have to have court approval for that. All right, next slide. This is the law that says you can have direct contact with the treating doctor. It's under the California Welfare and Institutions Code 5328.1. You have the right for prognosis, medications, side effects of medications, and you have direct contact with the treating doctor. Now, with that said, the doctors, they have a lot of patients, and we don't have that many psychiatrists. So be respectful of their time. If you can discuss things with the social worker and the caseworker and have them relay it to the doctor, do that. If you need to speak with the doctor directly, write down the points that you need to discuss it to the point. Don't get off on tangents, because then they don't ever want to answer your phone. When you're talking with the doctor, don't ever tell the doctor what you want. Like, okay, I want you to put him on this medication. He's going to look at you like, what are you, the doctor? And that's when they will request the court to remove you as conservator. You have to work with people for the recovery of your loved one. Okay, in Los Angeles, if the doctor refuses to speak with you and you need to speak with the doctor, contact Dr. Amanda Ruiz. She's with Department of Mental Health. Those are her phone numbers. Contact her. If you don't have that LPS paper or the guide for LPS conservatorship, download it from NAMI Urban LA. It's on their website. And they're not PDF files. So if you need to copy and paste something, you can. All right, next slide. Criminal court cases. If you have a criminal court case, when you go to court, take that history, symptoms, and gravely disabled. If you are the conservator, take your conservatorship papers. That elevates you to a position of power, believe it or not. Ask the public defender to request DMH court linkage program to be involved in the case. The court linkage program helps to open doors for treatment and placement, and they're very good. Each courthouse has a specific person assigned to that superior court. So it's a good idea to call the court linkage program, find out who's assigned, like to airport court or downtown LA court or Van Nuys court. Contact that person, give them the history, symptoms, and gravely disabled. Let them know when the case will be heard so that they will be ready to go. And but that's very important. The court linkage program can get them in a jail diversion program. They can get them housing. They can get them a whole slew of things. So you need that help. Request for jail or misdemeanor diversion programs. And some felony diversion programs they have, depending on what it is. If it's where they've really done damage to a person, chances are they'll put them in Patton or Metropolitan. But if it's a felony, but there's no harm to anybody, then they can probably work with you. The criminal court has the first right for placement for treatment. This is one of the powers you will lose if criminal court is involved. You can't say, well, let me go look at this place. They'll work with you. They'll listen to what you have to say. The court linkage person will do that. But the final decision for placement for treatment is criminal court. They have that final decision. But honestly, they'll work with you a lot, okay? The other thing that I'd like to say, if you tell the doctor you want to do holistic medications, no medications holistic, they will remove you immediately as the conservator. Because remember, the of the LPS is medication. So if you're saying we're not going to do it, we're just going to do holistic, why didn't you do that before you got the LPS? Because it didn't work. So you really don't want to do that. You want to work with everybody. Social workers befriend everybody. And keep in mind, the goal is not how they make you feel, but how they're working to help your loved one with recovery. All right, next slide. Possible treatment programs. LPS is the strongest because it mandates medication and it gives you the powers for that treatment, placement, and medication. AOT is under that. A lot of people, I refer to Linda Boyd for AOT assisted outpatient treatment. You cannot be under the LPS and AOT at the same time. But AOT is a pretty strong treatment program. They will work with your loved one, be it on the street, in your house, in a treatment program, and they will encourage them. They know what they're doing. They're well educated. They will encourage them to take medication. And if they do that, it's most helpful. Then you don't need LPS. But if they have trouble with that, they can take your loved one to court and have the court basically encourage the person to take the medication. And that's what they call the black robe syndrome. People listen to the judge says, I have to do this. Oh, okay, I'll do it. Mom and dad says I have to do it. I never listen to them anyway. I mean, that's just fact of life. Care Court, which starts December 31st. That's another program, but it does not mandate medication, but the people are well trained on what to do and how to encourage the person to take the medication. Another program that we have that's already in Los Angeles is the Home Team, and they can get an LPS conservatorship when the person is homeless on the street and not in the hospital or in jail. If they're in jail, request the doctor initiate the LPS conservatorship. Give them that history, symptoms, and gravely disabled that you learned about yesterday. It helps them to write up a case. Because keep in mind, when a person's in jail, that doctor may have 100 patients to look at. You think they're going to remember your loved one? But if you give the social worker at the jail the history, symptoms, and gravely disabled, ask them to give it to the doctor, he has a template that he can write out a case for you. And it makes a big difference. The last one is full service partnership. Each team handles about 15 people. AOT has a full service partnership, but each team handles 10 people and they're better trained. I like AOT a lot better. I'm not going to make my comment about full service partnership. I'll keep my mouth shut today. Next slide. Medications. This is really important. So if you're getting tired listening to me, perk up your ears right now. The medication is the key to get them on the road to recovery. Know all medications, side effects, dosages, when they take them, and research all those medications. If there's a medication that you're concerned about, you can call the pharmaceutical company that makes that. They'll tell you a whole slew of things. So that you want to do. Now, just to note, if a medication is a sustainer where they give them a shot, maybe a 30-day shot or whatever, just put this in the back of your mind. If they're on a shot, they recommend normally 4 weeks. Every 4 weeks, they get another shot. Everybody metabolizes differently. If your loved one at the end of 3.5 weeks is starting to get all out of sorts, and you're not sure they're going to go take that shot again, then what you want to do is decrease the time. So maybe they take it at every 3.5 weeks. But likewise, if 4 weeks come along, oh, they're all hunky dory, you might be able to continue that for like 4 weeks, 1 day, 2 days, till you find out where they are. Some people can go 5 weeks, but you don't make that decision. You talk with the doctor. Let the doctor know what you're seeing. Call the pharmaceutical company that makes the product and ask them about the situation. They'll tell you. Get that person's name and number and give it to the doctor so the doctor can call them if they need to. You want to know every medication your loved one is on. Now, I'm going off the script and I'm not putting this down either. If you have a migraine, and you heard me say this yesterday, and I have a headache, if I give you my Tylenol for your migraine, it won't phase your migraine. You need to up the ante for the medication for your migraine. My headache, I can take Tylenol, Excedrin, whatever, no big deal. It'll help my headache. But my migraine, it won't phase it. It's the same with medications. A lot of doctors prescribe medications. It's good for somebody who has a mental health problem. Your loved one has a serious mental illness. Big difference. So the medications that they'll tend to give for mental health would be Depakote, Seroquel, and Seroquel they'll give even for serious mental illness because it can help the person sleep a little bit better. But if they're giving it in the morning, that doesn't make sense. Ativan, Wellbutrin, those aren't going to help your loved ones. The ones that and I'm giving you the feedback that I get from many other people. Invega, INVEGA, the feedback that I get is about 85% to 90% of the people get pretty good results with that. You're looking for clarity of thinking with the least side effects. And what works for one, what medication works for one doesn't work for another. So it's trial and error that you have to do. That journal that you're keeping, that journal will help that doctor to do a better assessment of your loved one and get them on the right medication. So that's really important to have that. Another is Caplyta, CAPLYTA. Another one is Vraylar, and Vraylar is good if the person has negative symptoms of schizophrenia. That's things that have been taken from them. Their personality, their smile, they're the walking zombie. Vraylar tends to help that a lot. It's specific for that. And that's spelled V as in Victor, RAYLAR. So that's most helpful. Zyprexa, I've only seen one person or heard of because it's the feedback that I get from y'all. One person in maybe 25 years that it worked for, and it tends to put weight on you. Haldol is great when they go in the hospital. They're all over the place. It makes them go from, I hate you, mom, to, oh, mom, I love you so much. I like it for a short term, but it's hard on the body, and it really doesn't give a lot of clarity of thinking. It does some, but once you have that LPS conservatorship, if you haven't gone back and looked at your family album and find out, remember what they were like before. That's your goal, to get them as close to that person as possible. Now, Jim has told us about the National Institute on Drug Abuse. Oh, I thought it was, pardon? Drugs.com. Oh, okay. Well, there is a National Institute on Drugs Abuse. If you have to call, you can call them and they can tell you which ones are addictive. So be sure, I think I've covered the rest of this, your clarity of thinking with the least side effects. If a doctor writes a prescription for 4 or 5 psychotropics for them to start off with, you want to tell me which one's working? At that point, I would use my powers and say, doctor, I think this is great, but what do you think if we start out with one medication and see how that works? And I'll give you the feedback, what I'm seeing. And maybe then if we have to add something, we can. If the doctor says, oh no, they need all these psychotropics. And we had one doctor in a hospital give a person 13 psychotropics. I contacted the CEO and hey, that was taken care of right. Because every piece of medication, including aspirin, comes with side effects. And they all say, I do think death is on everyone, including aspirin. So, I mean, take all that with a grain of salt, but know the side effects. So if you see them, you're aware of it. Okay, next slide. Jim, you want to add anything?
No, I think you were thinking of NIDH, the National Institute on Drug Abuse.
Yes, I was.
I don't think they're really that accessible for exploring. The
No.
drugs.com website really does break down all the medications, the side effects, the ups and the downs. I mean, it's an amazing website.
Check it out. Check it out. And know those medications. The NAMI family to family class has a specific class that goes over the medications, and they keep that information up to date. So be sure to sign up for NAMI. It will empower you. It gives you a lot of empowerment. The NAMI family to family class. And a lot of people take it 2 and 3 times. You never know. Next slide. Guideline for medication, use the scientific method. You change one variable at a time. If you choose to change 2 medications, you're not going to know which one's working. And your goal is to find out what medication works the best for your loved one. Then if you have to add another one, you do. But if you don't have to, you don't want to. That's your goal, to find out what works the best for your loved one. Keep that journal and write those medications in there. When people call me, one of my first questions is, what medications are they on? And if I can tell them what medications they're on, if they're telling me, well, they've been on the conservatorship for a year, they have a lot of hallucinations, they have a lot of delusions, they don't want to talk with me, I can tell them. They're probably on Depakote, Cyprexa, Seroquel, Ativan, or even Abilify. Abilify is great for a mental health, but not necessarily that good for serious mental illness. And they'll tell me, yep, that's what they're on. That's not going to cut it. Okay, next one. The formulary. A lot of times doctors will say, well, this is not in their formulary, so we can't write a prescription for that particular medicine. The formulary is nothing more than a piece of paper that the doctor writes on and says, okay, we've tried this, 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 and this. We would like to try this other one. And the insurance companies, Medi-Cal, Medicare, and usually private insurance will approve it. The other thing that you can do is call the pharmaceutical company, tell them that you're interested in trying a certain medication. Could you have your pharmaceutical representative take it to this doctor, give them the contact information, address, and everything, and you can have a free sample to try it. If it doesn't work, hey, you haven't really done anything. If it works, then you can start to increase it. And the formulary, they will most likely approve that formulary. Be sure to seek medications that help serious mental illness. Folks, don't settle for just okay. When the doctor says your loved one's a walking zombie, oh, they're doing pretty good. They're doing a lot better than before. Yeah, they're a zombie. They're not threatening to kill everybody, but they're a zombie. I mean, is that how you want to live your life? I don't think so. You want them back to their old self. Keep that journal of what your loved one's saying and what they're not saying. Now, when your loved one is saying things to you, and I'm going to add a little bit of this, your journal for them, you're writing down their comments. Do not correct what they're saying. If you correct it, they're going to clam up and not talk to you anymore about what they're seeing or what they're hearing. What you can do is say, wow, that's got to make you feel very uncomfortable or scare you. I'm sorry you have to go through that. You're not arguing with them, you're agreeing, and write it down, because as they recover, this tells you where their mind is at all times. So that's really important to know that. Jim?
I think
No.
you nailed it well.
Okay, next slide. Jim.
Oh, yes, indeed. Placing a conservatee in a treatment facility. ICD is an intensive care division of the Department of Mental Health. It evaluates and suggests whether a person should be placed. You as a conservator should tour every facility and that they're recommending that you go to and ask questions. As conservator by law, your request for a placement facility must be honored as best as possible. And right on every contract, your express written permission must be given for any change in medication, treatment, and placement. You know, I wish they should make a little branding iron, or go down and have that made up as a stamp. And when you hospitalize your loved one, that you could just stamp that right on the paperwork. So, again, I'll just leave it up there for a second, Israeli, to try to capture this. When you're having to sign for treatment, they say, well, you have to sign these papers here for treatment, for medication treatment here in our hospital. You can sign that, but then you put up above it or in the line. I take these little pins that have like a needle point thing on it with me every time. And it says right on it, right on the contract, exactly how Gail has written it here, because they will just ignore your wishes if you don't put that in there. They said, well, you gave us permission to treat, so we're treating. These are very important words. Next slide.
Yeah. Well, let me just add something on the intensive care division. When your loved one's in the hospital should request intensive care division come and evaluate the person for facilities. If they're flight risk, they will probably suggest an IMD, that's Institute for Mental Disease, and it's a lockdown treatment facility. Now, it's not permanently locked down for your loved one, because as they get better, you can go and take them out for lunch if you're the conservator, or if the public guardian gives permission for that. You can go visit them. And as they get better, they give them permission to go on outings, to go with other people, and gradually to take other people with them, which is kind of nice because it gives them a little bit of responsibility. But usually the IMD will do 3 facilities. You contact the intensive care division on that LPS paper, which is on the website for NAMI Urban LA, in the resource numbers. You contact them, fax over a copy of your conservatorship papers, and ask them the name of the facilities that they're suggesting. Tour every one of them, or call, ask questions. A big one, you don't want to become a grandma or grandpa from those facilities. So, okay, how do you deal with sexual relationships when people are in these facilities? How do you deal with drugs? Do I get to talk to the doctor when I need to? You should be able to. Some facilities will say, well, we don't do that. Well, guess what? You're conservator, and the law is, yes, they do. So that's why I'm saying sometimes you have to fight for things, but your fight makes it easier for other people. Other people's fight has made it easier for you. So we're fighters, we have to be. But tour those facilities. If you don't feel any of them are appropriate, don't hesitate to call DMH or intensive care division, find out who's doing the evaluations, and let them know, okay, I've been to this, this, and this, and none of them are going to work because, and have a very good reason. Like one person, the young man, if people were within 6 feet of him, he was like, you're in my space. Why are you in my space? Well, that place, they packed them in like sardines. Your only privacy was on like a bed with a hospital curtain around you. that was not going to cut it. Another one, the person was very smart, very bright, but you wouldn't know it because at that time that person was mute, schizophrenic, and didn't talk. So they were putting him in a facility that catered predominantly to very low functioning people. That would have freaked that person out. So when the people at IMD knew this, who were doing the evaluation, they go, oh, okay. They gave them another facility to look at. And they will work with you. And going back to that express permission, if you don't put that on your contract, facilities consider you have just signed your conservatorship papers over to them. So you really have to have that on there. All right, next slide.
Thank you, Gail. So placement and treatment via hospital. The hospital request intensive care division, or also known as ICD, to evaluate conservatee for placement. The person can only be transferred from a lockdown facility to another lockdown facility. Institute for the Mental Disease, IMD, is a lockdown facility where the hospital will first discharge the patient. As a patient improves, they might skip the IMD and be discharged to an enhanced residential setting, ERS. I believe those used to be called here in Orange County an IMD, which anyway is a secure treatment facility. IMDs were not secure. Take it back. So just know that any time that your loved one is transferred, you can't transfer from a lower facility that maybe is unlocked, transfer up to a locked one. It can go from side to side. If they're in a locked facility, they can transfer them to a side facility, or they can transfer them down, or they can discharge them, but you can't go up. So it has to be the same or less restrictive in their environment. Gail, do you want to throw anything in there?
I'll just add, to get into a locked, you have to go from a locked facility to a locked. The hospital and jails are locked facility. So you can go from those to your IMD. You cannot go to an enhanced residential setting to an IMD. You would have to go back to a hospital and then to the IMD. And the wait for IMDs right now is, my understanding, is about 4 months. So, but while they're in the hospital, that is a great time to work really hard to find the right medication for your loved one. Because it's not like, we'll take this pill tomorrow, let's see how you are. Some medications, you have to know when it's going to start to work. Like in Vega, 3 or 4 days, you're going to know. A lot of people find out on day 1 it's going to work. But you really kind of have to know those things. So while they're in the hospital, if they are getting better and you found a good medication that works for them, they like it, they can probably skip the IMD and go to the ERS. And some people can even skip back and go to like a board and care or a sober living or something. It depends on how good that medication's working for them. All right, next slide.
So treatment and placement via jail. Generally, it will be in a state hospital like Patton and Metropolitan. For example, recently there was a family whose daughter decompensated and committed a felony. Basically, they have put her in jail, and they're waiting for one of the state mental hospitals to open up. Metropolitan, the last time I talked to them, the waiting list was over, I think, 300 people. So it takes a while to be transferred from jail to one of these other hospitals. There's another one up north, I think it's called Tescadero. Am I correct on that one, Gail?
Yes, yes.
So state hospitals are full oftentimes, and it does take a while for them to be transferred, just know that. And many times I've had to refer people to the Metropolitan State Mental Hospital. I know some people in there that can kind of explain this process in detail to them. So if this happens to you, if your loved one creates a felony and they say, we're going to hold them in jail until we can get them into a state mental hospital, call me and I'll give you the number for the right person to talk to at Metropolitan, and they'll kind of educate you on what to expect and what to do. Next slide. Normal movement through treatment facilities. An IMD, Institute for Mental Disease, also known as a lockdown facility. Enhanced residential settings, ERS, secure facility. Board and care, it's the least restrictive. You must go from lockdown hospital to jail to lockdown. We kind of covered this in the previous slides. The conservatee may skip a facility or go to a less restrictive facility if they improve in their recovery. So if your loved one is extremely ill, they may end up in one of these facilities like the IMD. And then as they get better, they can go down a level, or they can go sideways, or they may just skip down altogether, as it says in the last paragraph here or sentence. They can go to a less restrictive facility, excuse me. So that's pretty much how that flows in terms of hospitalizations. Gail, anything?
You covered it. You got it.
Next slide. So the doctor can request the court to remove you as conservator. Earlier we talked about how you're not liable for things. This is not the right slide for that. But anyway, we talked about working with your doctor. So you must be reasonable. The treating doctor is not going to put up with you if you start saying, look, doctor, I'm a conservator and I have a complete authority on what you can prescribe. And I just don't like that medication. You're not going to give that to my son or daughter. Guarantee you that doctor will be in court and say, Your Honor, I'm this patient's doctor. I have medical degrees. I have, 20 years experience under my belt. I know how the medications are going to work. And this conservator, who is the parent, is not letting me do my job. And they're saying that I cannot prescribe what I feel is the right medication. Absolutely, you'll be hearing from the court, and you will be in a case like this. You'll no longer be the conservator. They'll take that away from you. So what do you do when you really feel like, gosh, this is just not the right medication? We've been through this in the past. It's not worked. The doctor's not listening to me. You can change the treating doctor. You can find another psychiatrist, and you can have your loved one then put into that psychiatrist level of treatment. You just can't fight the doctor and say, no, you can't give that medication. Always try to work with your doctor, and you'll find that they are very receptive to the fact that you're trying to work with them. But if you're just hitting the wall, it might be time to look around to see if there's an alternate psychiatrist available for your loved one. Next slide.
Wait, can I just add a few things on that one?
I will
Go
let
back.
you, yes.
If the person's in an IMD and you are telling that doctor, you can't really change a doctor when they're in the IMD. But like Jim says, you have your loved one has been on that medication and it didn't work for him. That's what your journal is going to help you with. So if the doctor's going to be a jerk, some of them are, I hate to say, and you go to court, Your Honor, I've kept this journal. I explained to the doctor and put everything in writing, because the doctors will say, oh, I didn't see that, But if it's in writing, they can't quite do that. But put down, this medication makes this patient, volatile or agitated, or they never wake up. They sleep for 48 hours in a 24-hour day or something like that. Then the court's going to listen to you. But if you just go to court and go, I don't like the medicine, I don't want them to have that, that isn't going to happen. Also, if you're arguing with the doctor that I don't want this person going to a certain facility, they want to change the facility, if you don't have a good reason for it, they're not going to listen to you. And you can go to court, you can maintain your conservatorship if you have a reasonable reason for why you're doing it. But if you don't, you're out of luck. Okay, good. Next slide.
So conservatee loss of rights. While they're on conservatorship for 1 year, and it has to be renewed every year in a hearing in the court, in that interim of 1 year time, they cannot drive a car. And these are temporary, but they cannot drive a car. They don't have the right to enter into contracts, and they can't determine where they are going to live. That's your determination where they're going to live. More permanent restrictions for the conservatee is that they lose the right to shoot and possess guns. So that's, I think, more on a federal law level. But the temporary restrictions up here are temporary in the sense that as your loved one is on a conservatorship and the medications are working and they are getting to a point that they are stabilized and so forth, you can reapply to the courts and have their driver's license reinstated, and they would go through DMV on that. But there again, if they've gone out and they've entered into a bunch of contracts, I'm going to ask Gail to talk about, how to deal with contracts. If your loved one has gone out and they've signed a bunch of contracts and so forth, she has such a great line on that. But you have to realize that these losses are temporary. When they come off of conservatorships, these rights are reinstalled. It's further protection and so forth. Gail, do you want to talk about
All right. Yeah. Entering contracts. I don't know about y'all, but sometimes you get 1,001 mailing that comes in and it says sign here, you get $1,000. Let me tell you, your loved one's going to be signing and getting that money, and then he'll use a little to pay Peter and Paul, but he's keeping the rest of them, and it gets to be a problem. If they're under a conservatorship, you can cancel all of those. Hey, if they got the money, they got the money. But if that, credit card company decides to give them the money and they really haven't checked their credit, that's their problem for ignorance. I don't worry about them. But we had one fellow that left Los Angeles and he went to Vegas and married 3 women in one night. Those contracts were all null and void because he was under conservatorship and he didn't have the right to enter the contract. Let me just talk about the right to drive a car. If your loved one, remember, you're trying to get them on the road to recovery and get them back into society. So if they need to drive a car for a job or just, to drive a car again, basically you talk to the doctor, you give a written statement to the doctor that as conservator, you feel that they are well enough to drive a car. The doctor writes, there's a doctor's declaration, they give it to the court approves for them to drive the car. Then you have to take that to DMV and DMV approves for them to drive the car. So that's a little bit more of a process, but a lot of people are under conservatorships and they're driving cars. So that helps. And then as they're getting well, a lot of times you can give them, okay, where, you're coming out of an IMD. These are the facilities we're looking at. Do you have a preference where you'd like to go? Or even if they're going into an apartment, do they have a roommate that they would like to have as a roommate when they go in the apartment? Preferably not their drug dealer. That wouldn't work too well. But those are things that they can get back being under a conservatorship. So their whole goal is to help them to get their life back. We haven't had anybody ask for guns yet. But next slide. To reinstate the rights, and I pretty much just went through that. You write the letter for the card, letter to the doctor stating that you feel they can. The doctor fills out the form, gives it to the court, and the court, you take that and you give it to DMV. And sometimes they will do like a little evaluation of them. They just want to make sure that they sound like they're of sound mind. On the right to enter contracts, again, just request the court reinstate their right to enter contracts when you feel it's appropriate. All right, next slide. Next slide. Here's Sally. Hello.
Oh, we're skipping this one? Sorry, I switched to this one.
Okay, the renewal of the conservatorship. In Los Angeles, they want you to start 3 months early because the public guardian has to do an investigation and they need the time. They're so backed up for so many things. So you need a doctor's declaration stating that the person is gravely disabled. That means they're not in a position to still provide for their food, clothing, or shelter. Now, they're not looking at it like they did when they first put them under the conservatorship. Uh, Not at all like that. But they really aren't quite well enough to provide for that. Now, in all fairness, a lot of people, not a lot, but we have people that have chosen to remain under the conservatorship because they can be put back in the hospital quickly should they decide to go off their medications. And they'll tell the doctor, please write that paper that I'm gravely disabled. Let's say they've got a good job, they're doing really well. They're probably not gravely disabled anymore, but they're doing really well. They don't want off that conservatorship because in the state of California, there is not a medical directive that is honored that says, okay, I'm decompensating, I'm giving somebody the power to get me in the hospital and get me treated. We don't have that. The conservatorship's about the only thing. We've had a lady who was a chemist and working in a chemical factory, with research and things like that. And so she didn't want to be off that conservatorship because if she goes off of it, everything she's worked for could go down the drain. She didn't want that to happen. We've had people in the movie industry want to remain under the conservatorship. Not everybody does, but there are some people that do. So when you're renewing your conservatorship in Los Angeles, be sure to start 3 months early, get the doctor's declaration. You need 2 doctors, but usually the doctor will say, okay, the psychiatrist, he can sign, and the psychologist can sign. And it's pretty much a done deal. All right, Jim, you want to tell us about Orange County?
Yes, I do, in fact. When it's talking about starting the renewal process 3 months early, what you're doing is you're going down to the courts. There's also a way you can do this online. And I've never been good at that, and I've always gone right down to the courts. And I asked for the conservatorship renewal to be put back in place. And basically what they do is they set up a hearing date. Well, occasionally people forget to refile for the renewal of conservatorship in a timely manner. And they end up just at the last moment almost going down and asking to have a hearing for the renewal of conservatorship. Recently, there was an individual in a hospital and also in a long-term treatment facility hospital as well, where the individual said, well, gee, I'm off of conservatorship here, and it's not been renewed, so I'm not on conservatorship anymore. And the hospital calls me up and goes, is he still on conservatorship? So we went through the attorneys and discussed all this. Primarily, let's say that you are getting a court hearing on this and it's past the end of the conservatorship itself. It's past the 1 year mark. That conservatorship is still in effect, at least here in Orange County. I don't know how they do it in the rest of the state or LA, but
In
it's
Los Angeles, as long as the judge has approved it.
right. So basically, they've not lost it. But there was a family whose loved one was in a hospital. I believe it was in Torrance, and they said, "Oh, your son is his conservatorship's expired. Have you renewed it?" Well, yeah, it's in process. Well, no, unless you have the conservatorship papers, we're just going to kick him out of the hospital. And so I directed them. I called an attorney, an LPS attorney, and they kind of described the process to go through. And I never heard the final word on that because they went down to the courts and they couldn't get written information that would verify that the conservatorship was still in effect. You don't want this to happen to you. Boy, when you get that conservatorship renewed, you need to put down on all your calendars everywhere that, hey, you know what, 3 months before it expires, go back down to the courts or go through the internet, however that's done, and renew it. Don't let it lapse. Okay. So fine, if they don't need to be on the conservatorship, of course, that's a different story. But if they have an ongoing need, because we just haven't gotten the right medication to do its work yet, you don't want them to end up on the streets. Okay.
Yeah, let me just say, if they're contesting the conservatorship, the doctor needs to testify that they're still gravely disabled. That's what they're looking for. So if they're contesting, you need the doctor to do that. If they don't contest, and the public defender will call them and say, are you going to contest or not? If they say no, then they don't even have to go to court. And now we're doing, I think many courts do WebEx a lot, but they don't have to go to court if they're not contesting. And you want to do everything in your power to keep them from contesting. It's just, you don't get so stressed and you don't increase your gray hairs. Next slide.
Well, even if they say you don't, even if the public defender calls you and said, you know, your son's not contesting, you don't need to show up in court.
Oh, you show up.
Yeah. Show up anyway. You never know. Last minute, he may switch his mind on the whole thing. So,
yeah, you always, Jim's right. Always show up in court. You never know what happens in court.
Right.
So it's always a good thing to do. Okay, the gravely disabled. Remember, the law is they are unable to provide for their basic needs, shelter, food, or clothing. The key is the or. You only need one, but we try to hit all three if we can. But the law is really just one. And refer to all of these as safety and health risk. Go back to that paper where it's written, and I mean, use that statement. It's really good that they cannot provide for their own shelter. They can't handle a board and care shelter or whatever at this time safely. They can't provide for their own food. They've lost significant weight from not eating or compulsive eating, either one. Or the clothing, they wear the clothes long periods of time, tend to take them off at inappropriate places or times, and they dress inappropriate for the weather. Any one of those would cover it, but you really have to kind of hit one. Now, if they're in the terms of recovery and the doctor's writing the gravely disabled, they'll just write, you know, they can't provide for their food, shelter, or clothing. And that's pretty good because the court expects them to be on the road to recovery. They're not looking at like when they first came in and they granted the LPS. Jim, you want to add anything?
Nope. I think you can.
Next slide. The conservator's court renewal hearing, your loved one can ask for the court hearing where the judge decides, or a jury trial where you pick 12 people to decide. God bless you on that jury trial. That is harrowing. The court hearing is a lot easier, quicker. What you can do is tell your loved one, look, if you do a jury trial, you're going to be stuck in the hospital another 3 or 4 months because they may not get to you till that time. But when you're picking the jury trial, just a word to the wise, you can't ask somebody if they're Scientologist, but you hope that they're not on. You ask questions to kind of get around it because they don't believe in involuntary mental health treatment. We did 3 jury trials, and we're kind of picking the jury is kind of difficult. We did away with the piercings, spiked hair, and my favorite was the guy when we pulled from the pool. He saunters up and the judge says, sir, I have to ask you some questions. Do you understand what a conservatorship is? Yes, sir, I know all about that, Your Honor. I know all about that. It's all about money, ain't it, Your Honor? They're trying to conserve me. It's all about money, ain't it? Judge says, okay, next. But I mean, it's an interesting thing, but you can win those cases. But you have to prove the grave disabled. All right, next slide.
I'm sorry. If the conservatee goes AWOL,
Mhm.
You want to immediately file a missing persons report if in fact they are legitimately missing. Um, you do not have to wait any sort of a time frame for the police department to initiate a missing persons report. When you call in and you say, my loved one's missing, they are disabled in the sense that they have a serious mental illness and they're on conservatorship. Uh, they will initiate a missing persons report immediately. They will file it with the state. They will put out a broadcast throughout the whole structure of their enforcement people out in the streets, and they will do the best that they can to locate him. If you're disabled in any sort of a way, there is no waiting period to make that call. So you want to give a copy also of your conservatorship paper to the police. So I don't know, they may come out to your home and you can provide it to them there, or you may have to do it over the phone and you could fax it into them or go down there in person and make sure they get a copy of the paper, your conservatorship papers. Any person with a serious mental illness, it goes to the top of the missing persons list under missing children as a dependent adult, and they do not need to be under conservatorship. I think I misspoke a little bit early, but even without a conservatorship, if they're mentally ill, they go to the top of the list for as a missing persons that's missing. Outpost for Hope is a really remarkable website that I discovered some years back. It basically tells you exactly what you need to do if your loved one is missing. So I would suggest to everybody, go to Outpost for Hope now and at least kind of familiarize yourself with the processes that are involved if somebody is missing. I've dealt with families that have had their loved ones go missing for years. And so some real tragic stories. But there's also John and Jane Does that have gone missing that never really did show up. But a lot of our cemeteries across the U.S., unfortunately, and this is something I learned from Outpost for Hope, they have John and Jane Does in those cemeteries. There's a family that I know that I can't share any information on here that their loved one was missing for years. They didn't know where they were. They had gone out of state, and something happened to their loved one. When their body was discovered, there was a undertaker, or that's not quite the right word for them, but they did a really good job of forensic work and found out who the family was and was able to notify them that their family member was deceased. And so what I have learned also from this site is that you should provide samples of hair. And as Gail always said, yeah, that should go into a plain paper envelope, keeping it dry. And so you can keep that on file. But definitely you want to consider the seriousness of that, especially if they've had an ongoing history of running off and so forth. And a lot of times it's nothing serious. It may be that the person's run off and they've been unstable. They may go to the store with you, and all of a sudden you turn around and they're gone. And you're out looking in the parking lot. You're driving up and down the streets and you're looking for them. They're gone. Oh my goodness. Well, it may be that they were able to get some money in their pocket and wanted to run down to a liquor store and buy some liquor because they thought that would be a good thing to consume. And that doesn't mean that it's more serious than that, or maybe they just wanted to wander off and they show up, the police are really good about looking for them. They really do go out and they look for them. So they might just be gone for an hour, or they might be gone for 30 minutes, or they might be gone for a day. I know cases where families went into a hospital and they were trying to get their loved one hospitalized, and they were supposed to have the ambulance was supposed to make sure that they were taken into the locked facility, and they didn't. They left them in the waiting room out there with everybody else, and they up and ran out the door. And so the family had to file a missing persons report on that. And it was about a day or so they showed up. So again, this Outpost for Hope is a very informative website, and I recommend that you all go to that and learn what you can from it. Next slide.
I'd like to add just one thing. When you with your loved one, be sure and take a picture of them. Don't tell them, get up there, I want to take a picture. Do like a family picture, because then they don't mind. You can always crop you out, but just say, oh, come here, let's get a picture together or something. So you have somewhat current pictures and get that DNA. You don't want to yank a whole wad of hair out of their head, but some. And then, like Jim says, don't seal the envelope. Put it in a paper envelope and don't seal it. If you seal it, it'll tend to get moldy and then it's not any good. You want it somewhat dried out. And just quietly put that in other places. Hopefully you never, ever have to do this, but God bless you. If you do, you'll be glad you have it. Okay. Sorry, Jim.
No, please, no sorries needed. Leaving the state of California. So the LPS law is specific to the state of California. It's not valid in other states. And if you're, let's say you want to go back and take your conservatee with you so they can visit their Aunt Susie, well, you have to go to the court and you have to get permission to take your loved one out of the state for them to go and see their Aunt Susie. So just know you can't just throw them in the car or throw them on the airplane and off we go. California presently does not have
Reciprocity.
I get tongue-tied on that word every time with other states. So that the states are not working together in terms of conservatorships at all. Every state has their own conservatorships or something they're close to it. Gail, you want to add to that?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay, Araceli, next slide, please. So we're getting towards the end of our presentation today, and I just want to thank you for your determination and endurance to help your loved one, that you showed up today and wanted to learn more about what you can do to help them. And, you know, it's not an easy job. My gosh, we have to be an attorney. We have to know laws. We have to learn how the hospitals work. We have to know how the CAT team works. We have to know all about medications, and there's so much to learn if you're going to be an LPS conservator. And it's not easy. And again, that's why we so stress, you know, get involved with NAMI, go to their family to families training and so forth. You'll learn so much for that. And some days it's just overwhelming. And we say, oh my gosh, I can't take this anymore. You can still give 10% more. It's the Navy SEALs model of you can still, when you think you're at the end of your rope, you can always give it another 10%. And yet, you know, the Navy SEALs may say that, but they haven't walked our road. It's a tough road to walk, I'm telling you. So I just so am pleased to see all of you here today and taking the time out for your family member. So keep strong, take care of yourself. You know, if you're overwhelmed and you go down, you're not going to be of much use to your conservatee. Stay strong, get help if you need it. You are your loved one's strongest chance for recovery, and that's an absolute. Next slide. So
before you say something, I just want to say, a lot of times you're stressed and you're trying to sleep at night. You can't sleep and whatever. This is my grandmother's recipe, but it works. Take about a half a cup of milk, you know, just a half a cup of milk or something, warm milk at night. Drink it. It calms your mind. It helps you to sleep. Be in bed within 30 minutes because it'll knock you out. But it's one of the best things. You can go buy those melatonin pills. They don't do squat, but that milk will knock you out and it will calm you. And I've told that to many people and they call me back and they go, that stuff works. It really, you don't need it every night, but just when you're really stressed and you don't think you're going to sleep because your mind's going 1,000 miles a minute. So just a little bit of my medical advice to you.
great, thank you, Gail. And you know, it really does help. It helps a lot. Love milk. So got milk. Listen, I will tell you that I don't know of any other NAMI that's out there that's doing an LPS conservatorship training program like what NAMI Urban Los Angeles is doing. And, you know, it takes extra personnel and manpower and time, and you know, it takes money. So we're asking you to at least consider, if it's not a financial burden on you, of course, if you can donate whatever you feel that you can donate to NAMI Urban LA. This is their address. If you don't get a chance to get this all written down at the moment, you know, you can just Google NAMI Urban Los Angeles and you can get their address, and you can donate. That helps cover the cost of, you know, future meetings and so forth that are put on like this one. When you make a donation, please, you know, designate that for LPS Conservatorship program. That will keep it from going into the general fund, and it helps to cover the cost of this program that NAMI's doing. So, and I see in the website, people are thanking us. No, thank you for coming. It's just so great that you're all here today. Okay, so I think that's it. That's our last slide for today. So we'll open it up for questions.